And welcome to MC and MADD Talk the Civil War. This is episode 22, Gettysburg. Well, hey, at least it's part one. So,
Yeah.
I don't lose yet. I'm here, of course, as always, every week with MC. He'll be walking us through this. Hopefully 40 ounce will show up. Don't know. We'll see. But MC, Gettysburg, man. I thought maybe we could do it in one day, but that's not gonna work. This battle's way too, one, large in scope, two, important to just gloss over, right?
Right. And there's a lot, and to be honest, another good thing about it, and this is a good thing about it, it is one of the most studied battles, and as a result, there's a ton of resource material. All right. You can find tons and tons and tons of resource material as to what was going on, when was going on, because in many people's eyes, this is the turning point of the war. This is where the South, the point of no return for the South.
Yeah, but okay. Let's get one thing out of the way right from the top. The South, at the end of the Battle of Gettysburg, is still a force to be reckoned with, right? It's not over, but
no, the Army of Northern Virginia, while it has lost the battle, is not destroyed.
Exactly, and they make an orderly retreat. This isn't Manassas where they drop their weapons and run like little blue cowards. Anyway, the thing is, though, this is the beginning of the end. Almost every historian agrees upon that point. Even somebody like Shelby, right? Even he says this is the beginning of the end for the Confederacy.
Well, in many ways, the thing about it is that it's the high water mark simply because after this time, the North is really never invaded again. For all intents and purposes, there's a few raids in the Northern Territory. You still have the guerrilla actions taking place in the Missouri and Kansas areas. All right, and that continues. All right.
Well, hell, Jesse James doesn't put up his guns until he's shot in the back of the head. You know what I'm saying? Like that. Yeah, damn right that continues.
But those are also predicated a lot on family feuds and other things that are happening. But for all intents and purposes, from the standpoint of the Confederacy, now the Confederacy is completely on the defense the rest of the war. At no point do they really take an offensive operation of any note. There are things that happen. Do not misunderstand me. But there's no real the offensive operations taking place.
I was going to say, even if you look at Appomattox Courthouse, Lee wasn't whipped. Lee surrendered. He surrendered. He could have ran. All right, like they could have faded off into the woods, and they could have done a guerrilla movement. They could have.
Yeah, okay, but the forces are gone. Understand this. The problem is the forces are disintegrating. His force at that point, we'll get to that, but his force was disintegrating at that point. He came to the conclusion it was over.
There's a lot of people of the Ken Burns variety who like to say this is the end. Death nailed the South. They had no chance after this. I would contest that point. They are still a force to be reckoned with, but this is the turning point, even more so than Vicksburg, which I think Vicksburg is the turning point. That's the way I take it. But I don't have my degree yet, and so I gotta, leave that up to the actual historians at this point. When I get my own degree, then I could fucking
considering that Vicksburg surrendered on July 4th and the final day of battle was on July 3rd, is there really a whole lot of difference?
I know they were both simultaneous, right?
Yep.
It really is a turning point in more ways than one. But go ahead and set the stage for us a little bit here.
And there's some interesting anecdotes and some other interesting aspects that need to be talked about. All right. First of all, several things have happened prior to the actual battle, even prior to actual movement. There's several things going on. All right. First of all, the Army of the Potomac has once again retreated back north. All right, is more or less encamped around Washington. Okay, Chancellorsville was a major defeat. There's no doubt about that, but it wasn't a total defeat. All right. The Army of the Potomac is still getting men. It's still the most powerful army as far as firepower goes on the continent of North America. The morale is being rebuilt once again. While there were, bad things that happened in Chancellorsville, there's Union soldiers that did well, and they have been noticed. Lincoln, of course, at this point is looking for another general, and he initially tries to go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's where one I want to interject with the question from the chat. Falcon in the chat says, so this is the Confederates' Guadalcanal or Battle of the Bulge. I would more or less say Battle of the Bulge, I guess, is a good analogy, other than the fact the Confederates did have to retreat, where in the Battle of the Bulge, the Americans won.
Well, the difference between the Battle of the Bulge and this for the Confederacy is the fact that while the Confederacy, this is the turning point in the war, in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, the German army was just an absolute retreat after that. It wasn't, they really weren't as much of a fighting force as they were before. I mean, it's just a disintegration of the army at that point. You don't see the disintegration of the South yet. So a better analogy would be Guadalcanal, where, yeah, the Japanese lost Guadalcanal, but they were still a fighting force after that. There were still a number of battles that were going to take place after that. You can also look at it from the perspective of it's like Midway. After Midway, the Japanese were never in a point to conduct offensive operations. The Japanese Navy, everything after Midway is defensive in nature. It's an
yes
effort
and
to
no, though the Japanese were still having leadway in China, right? The Chinese ended up in revolt, and the Japanese were still pushing on that front. But that's a whole different war,
right? Well, but they are. But I'm just talking about the Japanese Navy. From that point on, the Japanese Navy is never in going on offensive operations. All right, after Midway. So, I mean, it is a turning point. People look at Midway as a turning point in the Pacific for the Americans, which it was, because the Americans at that point pretty much stay on the offensive the entire time. All right. And although there are years and years of fighting left, even after Gettysburg, there's still years of fight. There's still a year and a half of fighting left to go. So,
well, that was my point, MC. Once again, sorry to cut you off. It's just, that's my point, though. There's so many historians, especially documentary makers. Like, I keep throwing jabs at Ken Burns. Come on, MC. There's a reason for that. All right. He is very biased in the way he portrays the Confederacy. And that's a fact. Even Shelby is a lot more lenient towards the Union cause than Ken Burns would ever be towards the Confederate.
No, I don't know. I mean, depends on how you're viewing certain aspects of it. The thing that Ken Burns was trying to do is he was always trying to get in, anecdotes from personal anecdotes and people's writings. And as a result, that can slant a lot of the things. All right. It doesn't necessarily give you an overall picture, of everything going on. So you can make a point of that, like as you do. But I think you're being a little overly harsh on Ken Burns, to be honest.
Okay, well, that's fair. Real quick, and then I'll let you continue. Aircraft Sparky's in the chat. What's up, man? Gettysburg is considered the turning point because no real invasion of the North occurred again. He says anymore, but I'll say again. Vicksburg was essentially the final nail in the coffin. It's funny that you put it that way, though, because Vicksburg fell before Gettysburg actually ended. They were at pretty much the same time frame, but Vicksburg fell the third. Gettysburg, final day of battle, was it the fourth or the fifth?
Other way around. The final day of battle was the third, but they remained on the field through the fourth, and they actually start their retreat on the fifth. So it depends on.
That's why. Yeah, my point of view, it didn't end because Lee was still there, thumbing his nose at him. You know what I mean?
He wasn't thumbing their nose at him. He was quite afraid of what was going to happen.
Okay, maybe, but he was still there. He was still there. We're ready. He didn't run like Manassas. I'm sorry, but Manassas, both of them. Come on, guys. Bluecoats, you ran real quick.
Second Manassas, they didn't run real quick, but the first Manassas, that was a retreat. What happens?
That was a rout.
That's what happens when you allow spies. That was
all right.
That was the great advantage the South had on the spy network at that point.
But go ahead and continue to set the stage, and I'll try my best to not cut you off again.
All right. So anyway, what's happened in the North, of course, is Lincoln is very furious with Hooker. Hooker is demanding to have total autonomy. There's no way Lincoln's going to give him that. He's demonstrated that he screwed up badly, and of course, like a lot of people, that he's trying to cover up his mistakes. All right. He's not. Now, don't get me wrong. Hooker didn't throw any of his generals or subordinates under the bus, but at the same time, he's coming back. He's trying to make excuses, and of course, Lincoln's not having any of it. Lincoln attempts to turn he interviews Reynolds, the first Corps commander, and Reynolds turns down the position when he says, "I want 100% autonomy like McClellan had." Nope, you're not getting that. So he offers command, in essence, all right, to Meade. But this is very close, actually. Where Meade takes command is actually very close to the battle where the battle is going to be taking place. It's only like 2 or 3 days before Meade before he decides on Meade and replaces Hooker with Meade. So the movement toward Gettysburg, what's going to lead towards Gettysburg, is taking place initially under Hooker. And
yeah, absolutely. Do you think Meade had enough time to even prepare? He has to join the army on the march already, right?
Well, he was part of fifth. He's the 5th Corps commander. All right, so
all right.
He's part of the group that's already marching. He's now just told, you're in charge of all the forces. You have to direct all the forces. Right. So consolidation, configuration, all of that, getting his staff in place and everything. I mean, it was scramble mode for Meade.
How many troops did they leave? How many troops did they leave in D.C.? Do you know?
I think there's approximately, at that time, what was left around D.C. is probably around approximately 30,000 troops. Between 15 and 30.
Still a significant.
Oh yeah,
that's still a significant force, especially with the fortifications, right?
With the fortification, so and the real heavy artillery.
Yeah. Well, no. What I'm trying to get at though is even if Lee, which we'll get to Stuart. I'm not trying to jump forward. We will get to Stuart. But even if Lee knew the movements of the Union Army and he pivoted somehow, like I know, it would be almost impossible. But if he somehow did get around the force coming to meet him and just struck D.C., he still would have hell to pay, and then he'd be surrounded from both ends. There was no real way to take D.C. at this point.
No, I mean, you got to remember there's something else to think about here, and that is at this point in time, the Union forces in the field are significant. They're significantly outnumber the Confederate forces. And I'm not just talking about the Army of Potomac versus the Army of Northern Virginia. You've still got major Union armies in Kentucky, all right? And in fact, and in Ohio. And I'm trying to think of the guy's name's raid, all right, that goes into Ohio, takes place at this time as well. All right.
Yeah, but you're not going to move your troops from Kentucky to back up the Army of the Potomac at that point. Because then you're leaving it wide open for fucking douchebag Bragg.
No, because Bragg still has to deal with the Army of the Cumberland, all right, and the forces that Grant has. Okay, Bragg can't just go dancing up north. Okay, so the thing is Burnside has a good 50,000 men under his command, and of course he crushes that raid. That's true. However, if DC was significantly threatened, then by rail he could have transferred his men by rail into DC very quickly, all right, to plus it back up. This is the advantage of being able to move like that.
don't you shore up DC and sacrifice Kentucky though? We've had this talk with the Confederate forces and
if it was really threatening though, if it was a real threat, yeah, you would be leaving Kentucky open at that point. But you also got to remember the ability of the Union to move troops around, the logistics capability of the Union is far superior, right, to the South. So the South taking advantage of that, it's not easy.
How many forts in? Yeah, but how many forts and rivers are in Kentucky? I mean, if you're sacrificing Kentucky to save DC, isn't it easier for Lincoln just to go to Philadelphia? Like, I mean, sorry, I'm not one to think that a city is the whole master plan here. I'll lose my capital to win my war.
There are times when the value of this city is far more important, all right, than just the fact that it's a major city. And DC is one of those cities, just like Richmond was. I mean, there are several times. Go ahead.
I still think they should have moved back to Montgomery. I really don't think Richmond. No, seriously, I will sacrifice my capital to win my war.
You wouldn't have been. You would have been sacrificing the army of Northern Virginia, because
that you can't do.
Okay, yeah, so so how are you going to do that? But so anyway. Like I said, Meade is placed in charge, all right, toward the end. And the first thing, of course, he tries to do is he tries to consolidate his command, all right. But you got to remember, he's trying to consolidate a command during a major movement of the army, of the entire army, right, against going after a foe, right, that you're trying to come into contact with. So this is one of the reasons why Gettysburg ends up being where it is. All right, it's kind of decided on the first day, but we'll get into that. For the South, though, the thing to remember in the South is the South is not walking into this. People say, well, this is the high point of the South because of the invasion of the North, and that's very true. However, there are significant damage that's been done to the South, all right, and especially the Army of Northern Virginia. They have lost.
I would argue that this isn't. They have lost. Well, they lose Vicksburg during the movements. This movement was already planned before the fall of Vicksburg. Let's be fair. But the thing is, though, I would argue that the South is doing this out of desperation. This is what 62 or 63.
This is 1863. This is July of 1863. Yeah. But it's not,
exactly. So this is right around the time of the election, right? Lincoln's up for re-election.
No. Election's in 64. So you got another year to go before any of that really starts to take place. It isn't the kind of desperation that you're thinking of. All right. Lee has already come to the conclusion. All right. That the only way to win the war is to basically keep an army in the field, all right, and to create enough havoc and enough damage in the north, right, in the northern forces, that they decide, okay, it's not worth it to take the South. That's the kind of battle that he's fighting, okay? It's strategically he's trying to win the battle up north, so that and destroy the Army of Potomac. You got to remember this. In one regard, this is where Lee's obsession, all right, is total. He's got the idea that he has to totally destroy the Army of the Potomac. He's never been able to do it because he feels that if he can destroy the Army of the Potomac, then DC will have to fall because they can lay siege to it because there's not going to be another military force available to pull into there unless they actually pull things like I said, Burnside out of Kentucky, etc. Right?
Or they give Vicksburg back. But the thing is, though, if Lee had that idea in mind, he would have did a Sherman type approach, and it would have been scorched earth, and he would have burnt his way through Pennsylvania. But he doesn't. Why not?
Because he knows what will happen. All right, number one. He's got to convince them not to want to go to war. You got to understand that. The North is battling for different reasons than the South is. The North is battling for two reasons primarily. And one of those is a strictly moral reason, which is to free slavery or end slavery in America.
As of this point, yes, but it's not what the war started about. But anyway,
we're not talking about what the war started about. And even when you want to look at what the war started about, within the North, there was still always a very much a view that this will end slavery. So it was an undercurrent. It wasn't as openly stated, but after the Emancipation Proclamation, which had happened in January, it was. And it becomes the overriding viewpoint and the overriding thing that everyone talks about when they first ask, why are you fighting? A Union soldier will, number one, say to free the slaves, and then they'll say to preserve the Union.
I would say the draft riots in New York would contradict that, but go ahead.
The draft riots in New York don't happen until when?
Yeah, but they happen directly because anyway, I'm moving
on.
No,
they happen after this battle. Okay, so I mean,
yeah, I know, but they happen directly because that they don't want to be drafted to fight the war to free the slaves. Okay, but we will get to that argument. Like I said, I'm going to try and leave it alone.
The South has already issued a draft. It's already affecting their morale in the South. So
they have to. And there was already food riots in Richmond, which we need to cover actually.
Well, we can talk about that. Once again, we'll talk about that a little later. But one of the problems that the South has, especially the Army of Northern Virginia, is they've lost Andrew Jackson, or not Andrew Jackson, excuse me, Stonewall Jackson. All right, and this is a major blow to Lee, and Lee has to reconfigure his army. Okay, he has to reconfigure his forces. All right, Ewell is given Stonewall's command. Basically, he changes the corps up a little bit. There is a lot of tension that Lee has noticed between Longstreet and McLaws. All right, although I think he leaves McLaws under Longstreet. No, he moves McLaws out from under Longstreet and puts him in one of the other corps. I think he puts him under Jubal Early's group. So I mean, there are things he's realigned. Okay, so the South is repositioning for this attack. There is also something that you've stated many times, which is Jefferson Davis wanted to end the idea of the offensive operation, all right, and actually send a portion of Lee's army to attempt to raise the siege of Vicksburg.
Yeah.
Okay. So these are other things that are going on at the time. It gets denied, and to be honest, one of the problems that Lee would have had if he attempted to do that would be transporting troops down there that deep into the South would have been very difficult to get them back in time of other battles. All right. So Lee understood this. Lee understood that if those troops went down there, they weren't coming back. All right. Anytime soon, because even if you raise temporarily the siege of Vicksburg, all right, for how long can you hold it before you're pinned back in there again? All right.
Well, exactly.
You still would have had to fight Grant's forces in a land battle campaign. So it's either move the entire army down, which means abandon Virginia. Virginia would be gone, and abandon North Carolina, and watch the collapse of the South from that perspective. So you're kind of caught in the catch-22, and Lee was, in my opinion, right to maintain that. Another thing that happens. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go for it.
Another thing that happens, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share this map. Pull up this map. Okay.
Yeah, you're good. And I got you presented to everybody. You're good.
Okay. This map shows a lot of different things going on and different dates of where a lot of this begins to take place. And you can see people's movements as it goes through. But the one I'm talking about right now takes place right here. Okay. This is the fight at Brandywine Station. Okay. Now, and you can see that it happens on June 9th. Okay, what happens at Brandywine Station? Okay, Lee wants to be able to move his army up north, and he needs to have Stuart screen his forces from the Union, so they don't know that his forces are on the move. So what he orders is he orders a preemptive attack, all right, actually in this area by Stuart, okay, all right, and also through here you'll see where Stuart moves, all right, in an attempt to delay things. But before he can actually kick that off, the Union cavalry attacks. Pleasanton launches a twofold attack on Stuart. Okay, and this is he first Buford attacks, and luckily for Stuart, they were able to pull up their artillery. All right, to basically attack and hit a column of Union troops. However, it is very costly. While it does eventually slow down and stop Buford, right, who's coming in from the north, and that northern arrow that everybody sees right here, and it does blunt the attack, Buford actually does overrun that artillery, all right, and tries to seize those guns. And while all that's taking place and Stuart is concentrating on that, this lower end attack happens. Okay.
So does Stuart just get outfoxed here?
He gets freaking surprised twice here. All right. And actually has to call for forces to come help him here. Now, as these forces start to pull up, okay, Pleasanton then says, okay, well, you know, it was just a spoiling attack anyway. We'll go ahead and retreat. Okay. Now, why is this important? It's important because, one, it gave the Union early warning that something was going on with Lee. They didn't know what, but they knew that Lee was on the move. Two, is it embarrassed Stuart. Stuart then feels because he got caught with his pants down in a battle, in the same battle twice, he took it on the chin, and there are of course reports being written in the newspapers, all right, basically upset that Stuart screwed this up, and they're blaming Stuart for this. Which, okay, yeah, you can blame him. I mean, you could also blame the enemy for being there, but basically Stuart is you know, his reputation has been stained. Okay, Stuart is part of that realignment that has happened in the southern forces, and he says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave a couple of my more experienced guys back behind. All right, to ensure that we're not surprised. I'm going to allow a good force. About 10,000 cavalry given directly to Lee, all right? But the men that he gives to Lee, the men that he selects to run that 10,000 are men that Lee doesn't trust, that he doesn't really know and he doesn't trust. And as a result, if Lee doesn't trust somebody, he's not going to use them unless he absolutely needs to. Okay? So he's not going to direct them to do things necessarily unless he absolutely has to have them. All right, this is where Lee has a little bit of a blind spot. Okay, the forces that Stuart leaves in the back to defend the rear are generals that Lee does know and Lee does trust. However, Stuart doesn't trust them. They have some personal animosities, not the least of which is one of them had previously been one of the quarters of his wife. Okay, so there was some no love lost in this regard, right? Some bad blood.
Well, why would you put someone like that as a rear guard, though? That's saving his life. I say put him on the front line, but anyway.
No, you're leaving him back. He's leaving them back behind, all right, to guard against a northern incursion toward Virginia. They're not part of the army.
Oh, so he's straight cutting them out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, basically he's cutting them out of the forces.
Well, Stuart was known for being kind of a peacock, right? Stuart was very fucking prideful, I guess, for lack of a better term. And also when it comes to Lee, did the North fear Lee as much as the South revered him? I kind of wanted to ask you that question for a while.
he was feared. No, I wouldn't go so far as to say feared. Okay, they knew that Lee was a great commander. All right, they did have an overly grandiose respect for him to a point. Okay, did they fear? No, because they believed in their own armies. They believed in their own abilities. All right, they didn't necessarily fear Lee. Um, they did respect Lee. All right, they did worry about what Lee would do, but it wasn't with the exception of possibly Hooker, it wasn't necessarily a fatal reverence or anything in regards to fighting with Lee. They didn't have an over they didn't have an overly inflated fear of Lee. If Lee showed up, they weren't going to go, oh shit, you know. It they would, I think, to be honest, that they had more concern about Stonewall Jackson than they did of Lee specifically.
And then with Stonewall out of the way, that probably helped them. But okay, so Stewart gets caught with his pants down. He then what? Just stops being the eyes and ears of the Army of Northern Virginia?
No,
I mean,
no.
I know it's just a movie, all right. I know. but Gettysburg, right? There's that scene with Lee dressing him down, and you know, Stewart says, "You know what? I will resign," and Lee says, "No, I need you here." But you can tell, like, I don't know.
There is something that we haven't talked a whole lot about, and that is the Lee's personality. Lee was generally a quiet individual, however, and very reserved, but he had a temper on him. When he got mad, they would talk about how his forehead would radiate red and the veins would stick out in his neck. Okay, when he got upset. So Lee had a temper to him. All right. While he was generally reserved and calm and stuff, all right, he was still pretty fiery in certain regards, and he was known to be very acerbic under certain circumstances. He wasn't unfair, though. Okay, I mean, he would say things in the heat of the moment, but once the moment had passed, things would be back to normal. All right, but he did have a temper. All right. What's interesting is, from a personality standpoint, is Meade has a similar type of personality. Once again, he's very calm generally, but has a very temper. So if he can get mad very quickly if people do stupid things. And you will actually see both of their tempers in this battle, all right, take place. With obviously with Lee and Stewart, but then with Meade and Sickles. All right, so well, go ahead.
I would argue that Lee's continuous assault with Pickett would also be his temper. There's another scene in the Gettysburg movie. We should move our forces here, I think Armstead says to him, and Lee says, "No, the enemy is there. We will fight them there." It was Longstreet. Okay, yeah. But yeah, the enemy is there. We will fight them there. That is rather arrogant, isn't it?
It is, and that goes back to something else that we were talking about earlier, right? A lot of people looked at Lee and said he started getting full of himself and he thought he couldn't be beaten. That's really not how he viewed things. He looked at it. He was more humble than that. But he had gotten to the point where he believed that the Army of Northern Virginia was invincible. Not that he couldn't make mistakes. He believed that any mistake that he made, however, his troops would be able to, fix it. His troops would be able to overcome any of the mistakes that he makes. All right. So this becomes an overarching theme. He has taken the Army of Northern Virginia into the North because he believes that the Army of Northern Virginia will be once again victorious. Now, he's hoping it's going to be a massive victory in which the Army of the Potomac is finally destroyed, all right, and he can then start to say, okay, we're going to lay peace terms and see whether or not Washington is willing to capitulate. All right.
Well,
But
no, and like we were talking about earlier, I think the difference is the hubris is more like Washington with the colonial army, rather than Napoleon and himself.
yes,
Napoleon was all about himself. Washington, after going through Valley Forge, and even the year after, which was worse than Valley Forge, he believed his troops could survive anything. Napoleon believed he was God, pretty much.
well,
I mean,
yeah, he thought that everything revolved around him and it was centralized to him. All right, and of course, the generals get the lion's share of the accolades, but they also get the lion's share of the blame, and they never deserve as much of the accolades as they get, and they don't deserve as much of the blame as they get. So it's kind of like counterbalanced. All right, now there are several other things that happen if you notice on this timeline. Right, is you have small little skirmishes, and these are little skirmishes, but they're important because, as you'll notice, here's Pleasanton. Okay, is you're starting to see the Army of the Potomac begin to move. And after this little conflict right here, all right, in Upper Middleton, all right, where both sides basically fight a quick battle here, right, and then both sides retreat. However, two things happen with this. One, the Union knows that Stuart or that Lee's entire army is on the move. They weren't able to stop them. They weren't able to keep them in the Shenandoah and prevent them from getting out through some of these gaps. All right. But they do know that the entire Army of Northern Virginia is on the move north.
Okay,
Stuart at this point, all right, at this point right here, Stuart receives information that he is supposed to, basically what people think. I mean, because there's no confirmation of this. There's nothing but more or less speculation and secondary sourcing behind it. People believe that Stuart was supposed to be covering Early's and AP Hill's movements to the north, all right, and acting as a screening force. But as you see, as part of this, Stuart says, okay, let me get back over here, and he starts to do this movement through here. Now, what he doesn't, when he does this, all right, and he gets over here, he makes the mistake of believing that he'll be able just to turn very quickly and come back and join up to the army. The problem is that the Army of the Potomac is already on the moves. When he comes down and around here underneath these troops, he actually thinks he's going over the top of them. And in reality, a good section of the Union troops are already here. They're already on the move as they begin to march up north. And this is where you start to see where Stuart keeps looking, trying to figure out a way to come back. All right, he's trying to come back and do what he's supposed to with Ewell. Meanwhile, what you see here, notice you have Pleasanton and the Union cavalry are keeping fairly good close ties on where, and have a good idea where the Confederate troops are this entire time.
Well, no, and Lee is completely in the dark on it. He doesn't know.
That is correct.
Stuart takes it upon himself to go and raid a Union supply depot, right? Yeah, they need shoes and shit, okay? I mean, they need some shit. I get it. But you look like what you're saying. Like, look at this map. The Confederate forces are on either side of the Union, and with the cavalry up in the air over here, I could tell that Stuart could be fucking taken.
This is just Stuart over here. Okay.
Well, that's what I was saying. The cavalry is in the air. The cavalry is, they have no backup at all. They're in enemy territory. They're not screening the movements of the Confederacy.
No, they're not. They were supposed to be over here acting as this kind of a screen. All right. But the problem is that Stuart can't get back. And the reason he can't get back isn't because he's bound and determined to attack here at Williamsburg, Westminster, right? It isn't that he's trying to hit here at Westminster. What he's trying to do is he's trying to figure out a way to get back, but Union infantry, column after column of Union infantry, are in the way. He can't just easily get back. And it's at this point here he starts to realize, oh, holy crap, I'm completely out of control here. I've got to go all the way around, and that's why you see his movement eventually take place all the way around as it comes up across.
Well, no, and the further north you get, the more trouble you're in if you're Stuart, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, okay, here it shows a G, this little fight here, right? A G. Now, what's interesting here, and you'll notice that Stuart, it shows Stuart going there, and it shows Ewell going there, right? All that is true, but Ewell's the one who attacks this, not Stuart, all right, in Carlisle. And Ewell has already turned and is marching toward Gettysburg when Stuart attempts to come up here to Carlisle.
And they don't even know. Like, they're completely in the dark about each other at this point, right?
Stuart is hearing rumors of where Ewell is, and he knows he's supposed to be screening Ewell, so he's trying to catch up to Ewell.
God, it sounds like such a clusterfuck.
Well, it turned into a cluster. If you really want to take a look at it, this is a ride completely around the Union Army. Woohoo! Did a lot of good this time, though, didn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't quite what Stonewall did, was it?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't the great success that had been done earlier.
But okay, here's the thing. I don't think Stuart necessarily messed up, especially looking at the map here. I think he got stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the rock is the Union, and the hard place is the other side of the fucking Union. I mean, where are you going to go at this point?
Well, he made it. What's the mistake Stuart made was, one, in the people that he had given to Lee, all right, to act as enough of a screening force, were not troops that Lee could utilize. All right, they were not commanders that Lee trusted. Therefore, Lee wouldn't send them to go scouting because he didn't know them. And he didn't trust them. So he didn't know if any of the information that they would give him was going to be accurate. He relied upon Stuart too much for that. Stuart never realized that. Now, part of the reason he never realized that is because a lot of the other trusted commanders, all right, were subordinates under Stonewall Jackson, another person that he trusted dramatically, right, that Lee trusted. He no longer has Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson has died due to injuries at Chancellorsville. All right, so there's a lot of things coming to a head here that create this dynamic. All right, like I said before, the realignment of that Stuart has done within his own cavalry units. All right, the fact that he leaves behind some of his commanders whom Lee did trust, but who Stuart himself had personal animosity with, and had issues with them from that standpoint.
Well, no, and I think Stuart was very daring, and the stories of him riding directly into a Union general's tent and stealing his fucking uniform are amazing. But he messes up here. If Lee had his eyes out there, he would have known the Union movements, and the battle would not have been fought on the shitty ground that is Gettysburg. Sorry, not the place to have battle for the Confederates.
Yeah, but the Lee has made a mistake even doing it to this degree, though. All right, you got to remember Lee is out on his own. All right, he is living off the land. They are just grabbing as they march through Maryland and as they march through Pennsylvania. They encounter farms. They are stripping the farms of anything that's edible. Okay, and then they're throwing the people worthless freaking Confederate script, right? Saying here's some money for what we're taking. Okay, so I mean, he's living off the land. There's only so far you can do it, but if you notice, well, the biggest problem is yeah, you can live off the land, but what you can't do is you can't replenish your weapons. You can't replenish ammo very easily. And the further you get into this area, the more difficult that becomes. So a sustained fight in the north is really a lot riskier than many people. They don't really talk about this, but it's an extraordinarily risky move. Because if he gets trapped in the north, it's a matter of time. It becomes just a matter of time before he is destroyed.
Which is why Lee ends up retreating after Gettysburg, which I wouldn't have if I was him. Once you commit, you commit. I say you redeploy your troops and you continue. And I would have done, looking back, a scorched earth policy. I would have burnt half of Pennsylvania down. All right, like
you fail to understand that doing so what the consequences of doing something that would be. All right.
Hey, it worked pretty good for Sherman.
It did, and it was a tactic that worked, but it would have started the Shenandoah campaign under Sheridan that much sooner, wouldn't it? So
okay, here's the thing though. Lee's initial plans. Do we know exactly, other than getting the Army of the Potomac to fight in the field, what his initial plans were?
Not exactly, because he didn't have any. All right. I mean, his plans were to send his troops out, scout an area that they could battle in. He figured he would have plenty of warning to be able to set up on good ground and force then the army to attack him in a defensive position that he has created for himself. Now, there's several reasons why that doesn't happen, not the least of which is you're moving in enemy territory that you're not familiar with. Okay, so that becomes somewhat problematic. The fact that Stuart is incommunicado is a second part of that.
We talk about they're not familiar with the ground. We say that over and over again every week. Okay, in 1860, they're all Americans. How do you not know the ground in Pennsylvania? How do you not have maps? I mean, really.
Yeah, why would you have a map of Pennsylvania?
Why wouldn't you? I have a whole book full of maps.
Okay, yeah, because there's things that allow you to purchase maps today, and for crying out loud, we have the internet today. But they didn't have the internet back then.
I'm not saying internet. I'm saying it's Pennsylvania. It's right by Virginia, right?
Actual maps that show what these roads are like and up to date were being drawn by hand. And then what did you have to do? If you were going to print them, you basically had to make a plate. Maps were very difficult to come by. Maps took a long time to actually create real good maps because they for all intents and purposes, the vast majority of them were hand drawn and then copied on the plates. And that's only if you were going to, sell a lot of them. Well, how many maps are you going to buy? How many maps are you going to purchase? Right? Especially if you have no reason to ever think that you're ever going to go into that area. You wouldn't even bother looking at a map.
It seems so, I don't know, like, okay, 1860, you're getting ready to secede. How about you get some maps of Pennsylvania and fucking Maryland? You know what I'm saying?
Who's getting ready to secede?
Well, my side, not yours, but you know what I mean. Like,
no. Specifically your side. Who's getting ready to secede?
South Carolina.
Okay, do you think South Carolina is thinking about getting maps of Pennsylvania?
They better be if they want to go to war.
You got to remember, their belief is that there's no way there will be a war. The war will last, maybe a couple of battles, 6 months at the most. God.
They were idiots. Like, no, I hate the fire. I hate the firebrands just as much as I hate the fucking abolitionists. Both sides stoked the fire and created what would kill 600,000 plus American lives. I hate both fucking radical groups equally.
Well, one of them had a moral cause and the other one didn't.
Well, it is what it is. I can't defend that. You win that one.
Okay, but what this map shows you, it shows you the movement, and of course, why isn't everybody always sitting in a straight line? It's because you can't just march troops in a straight line on a road. All right, you can't advance fast enough that way. So they're trying multiple lines until they get to Chambersburg, and then as you see, there's a multiple people going in different direction. Ewell, part of Ewell's corps, all right, with Gordon, comes down here to Gettysburg because Gettysburg has shoes. AP Hill is
Yeah.
following. AP Hill is following behind Ewell.
Let's stop. Let's stop. Let's not laugh about that. That's a real thing, right? Half of these troops, for the Confederacy, didn't even have shoes anymore. They got what? One uniform that was given to them when they fucking were either drafted or they signed up, and that's it. There ain't shit else.
It kind of depended upon where the units were initially outfitted and how well they were outfitted. The Union forces are outfitted far superior, right?
And that's a real thing. Think about Stonewall Jackson marching around in Chancellorsville and fucking hitting them. Half those troops didn't even have shoes. All right, think about that.
That's true. They were attacking. They were attacking basically on foot in many cases. But what you also see here is you see Ewell has split off part of his military, partly to come up over here to Carlisle. All right, and then the other part is coming here to go to Gettysburg. Now, at this point in time, of course, and this is becoming later in the as we get toward the end of the where the battle is getting ready to begin, right before the battle actually begins. All right, what you're seeing is the movements that are taking place. You have a movement here, you have a movement here. All these roads basically start to flow into Gettysburg, all right, which is why from Meade's perspective, they all start to come in, right? And from the Lee's perspective is this. Obviously, Meade's perspective is this. You see these roads that all start to lead toward Gettysburg. Now, the ones who get to Gettysburg first are Buford's cavalry.
Should have took Buford. Yeah, I know, but Buford's cavalry is what? 500 men tops? He should have been defeated in fucking whole before the rest of the Union ever showed up.
I think he was
pussyfooted around it.
Buford's cavalry, if I'm not mistaken, is about 1,500 men, so it's not 500.
Okay, well, that's 1,000 more. I mean, whatever. Throw in one in front of there. There you go. But no, I'm looking at the chat, and I apologize for my daughter crying behind me, guys. Sorry. Falcon in the chat says Pennsylvania then is like Russia is for us now as far as maps are concerned. He follows that up with remember World War I was supposed to be short? And Cabby, flip-flops? Yeah, you go to war in flip-flops, my fucking fruity friend.
Yeah, flip-flops are great for today. You did not have a lot of wooden shoes. You didn't have the Japanese idea of flip-flops. All right, wasn't real prevalent in America at that time. All right, to be honest, in the South, many of the people in the South, that's how their daily lives were. They didn't have shoes, mainly because in the South, it doesn't really get cold all that often. So how often do you really need to wear shoes? So they've been used to walking barefoot, many of these people, their entire lives. So it's not saying that it's not.
Are you saying that it's okay that they were fucking stuck walking barefoot? Because,
no. I'm trying to explain that the conditions are completely different back then than they are today. All right. There's a huge difference between walking on asphalt, all right, and walking on just a regular dirt road, not a gravel road, just a dirt road.
Well, no, and to be fair, when I was a kid, I would run across our gravel fucking driveway barefoot all the damn time. Like, seriously, you get used to it. But still, when you look at the way the Union was supplied and the Confederacy, there is a stark difference. And there's a reason why they went to Gettysburg.
There definitely is a stark difference. And they were part of Ewell under Gordon, all right, are headed toward Gettysburg to get shoes, all right? And Gordon, which is he's leading this point, all right, is under the assumption, right, that all that's in Gettysburg is just a small group of militia, maybe a couple hundred militia. All right, he's not aware, all right, that this is Union cavalry. Now, Longstreet, all right, has Harrison. We talked about Harrison being a spy, right? Who has scouted this region, is quite well aware, all right, that what's there is Buford's cavalry, that it isn't, okay, he doesn't know it's Buford, but he knows it's Union cavalry. And one of the things that people forget, let me finish this up. One of the things that people tend to forget about is when we talk about cavalry because it moves so quickly, but in reality, the vast majority of the cavalry duels happened. They would get in place, they would jump off their horses, somebody would take their horses, and they would fight on foot, and then they would jump back on their horses and ride off to the next part of the battle. That's how cavalry generally fought.
Generally, but if you look at people like Forrest, they were a riding cavalry. They would fight on horseback.
No, but even Forrest, for the most part, his cavalry fought on foot when they actually fought. There were incidents where the cavalry would ride into one another. Yes, that did happen. But for the most part, those were rare and few and far between. Did it happen? Yes. Did it happen often? No.
Okay. Fair enough. All right. So my question was, and once again, I'm sorry about the kids, guys. It's almost Christmas. They're, and it's Sunday. They're home, obviously. Okay. So, how quick between the initial contact with Buford did Lee get notified? How fast is the transition of information here?
He's notified that there's contact at Gettysburg, all right? But one of the things that he has been notified of prior to that, okay, which is why he begins to concentrate in Gettysburg, is the fact that the Union Army is on the move and a lot closer to him than he believes. And so what he's trying to do now is he's looking at the roads and he's saying, okay, where can I consolidate and then look for good ground? He needs to consolidate his forces so that they aren't defeated in detail. Because if the Union Army can come up and hit Lee with most of its army against smaller units, right, they can destroy Lee very quickly and then get behind him and seal his return from being able to come back after the battle. So Lee he understands, okay, I've got troops all over the place. You've got part of Ewell's command up in Carlisle. Some of them are in Cashtown. They're spread out all over the place. All right. If you'll notice, here's A.P. Hill. He's almost on June 30th. Or July 1st, he's getting toward Gettysburg. Longstreet's here. Longstreet's still back here at Chambersburg.
Yeah, no, and what's the civilian population of Pennsylvania doing right now? They're like, holy shit, here's the South, right? Like we're being invaded, right?
Yes. And of course, one of what everyone was thinking at, and this is where I think that possibly, when you asked that question earlier, what was Lee's target? I think that what Lee was probably trying to get to, I think he was trying to get as much of his army up here as possible to attack Harrisburg. Harrisburg being one of the major areas for Pennsylvania. Okay, so I think they were trying to get to Harrisburg. They never actually get to Harrisburg. They do send some foraging parties, which isn't shown on this map, out toward Harrisburg, but they never actually get there.
Well, now, and once again, I know it would have been a PR disaster to burn Philly, but I'm just saying, should have burned Philly.
If you go to Philly, now notice you don't see Philly on this map. Okay. Philly's like way over here. Lee never would have made it back to Virginia. Period.
But at least he would have got to burn Philly after what they end up doing to Atlanta. I'm just saying, it's worth it.
It's another pipe dream. The war would have been over that much sooner. Atlanta may never have gotten burned. They may have sued for peace long before that.
Have you seen the pictures of Atlanta? Because you're going to see them when we get to Atlanta.
You're acting like
I am not. I'm not letting Sherman off the hook. I'm not.
For
we
what?
Will get to him.
Being a war? Welcome
for being a genocidal maniac.
He's not a genocidal maniac. He didn't go around just willy-nilly shooting people in the streets and hanging them. You compare freaking Sherman, and then you could compare the rape of Nanking, and then you'll start to understand the difference between what was really going on.
I wasn't going to be a dick, but I'll be a dick. Sherman is almost as bad as Hitler. There, I said it.
No, he's not even close. You read the accounts of the rape of Nanking, and you freaking tell me what that was like, and then try and tell me there's not a difference there. With the Japanese soldiers having contact with each other, did you have anything like Japanese soldiers having contests to see how many bodies they could slice through in a single freaking swipe of one of their swords? Where they were freaking competing with one another, where they were taking the women out in the things and then literally raping them to death as punishment and making their families watch. All right, as man after man were freaking and then afterwards they would behead their husbands and behead their sons in front of them. You don't realize what war can be like.
Japanese were monsters. Holy shit. Anyway,
well, okay, and I'm focusing on the rape in Nanking because it's one of the more explicit things that they have evidence for. But back in
the Death March, right?
The Battalion Death March is something else that one day I'll talk about. But the idea of what warfare is, okay, you've got some idealized view of what it is, rather than a realistic view of what war really is. And civilian populations always suffer in war. Almost always. It's real rare. We in the United States don't understand that. You have no conception of that. All right, not today. Of the people that I'm talking about living today. You don't even know what deprivation is. During World War II, the population was suffering under rationing because of how much was being pushed toward the war effort. People couldn't even bake cakes. They had to save up, all right, to get enough flour, to get enough sugar and things to bake a birthday cake. It would take months for them to save up enough to where they could bake the cake. That's the kind of planning that had to go on during that time frame.
Was it a gay wedding cake? Sorry, I had to break the tension. Like, damn. I always make fun of Sherman. Like, holy shit, you got into it today. I'm looking at the chat here. Falcon, dude. If you like history, man, you're welcome to join us one of these times. Subscribe and maybe join my Discord and jump in on one of these Civil War streams, man. He says, not comparable. Look up Unit 137. Okay, I'll Google that. I'm not sure what you're referring to exactly, but
yeah,
I'm guessing MC does.
Yes, I know what he's referring to. But then I'll let you take a look at that. But you have to understand the time frame and what was possible and what wasn't possible. And you have to understand what war actually is. This idea of warfare, all right, the idealized view of warfare is just that. It's an idealized view. But
okay, well, that's fair, but MC, that's fair. But MC, here's the thing, though. You're saying what Sherman did is perfectly fine, and I keep saying, burn Philly, ha ha ha, and they should have burned a hole through Pennsylvania on this march specifically. Well, no, here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. What if they did burn through Pennsylvania? You're saying it would be a bad thing for the Confederacy to do it. Is that moral grounds, or is that the fact that it would just hurt the cause
for the Confederacy to do it because the Army of Northern Virginia would have ceased to exist?
Even if they just burnt their way to Gettysburg and then burnt their way back when they retreated? Like, let's say everything else happens the same. They're just lighting shit on fire on the way.
The burning things like that are is a delaying tactic, all right, when you're trying to run from the enemy. All right. If you're trying to...
That's not how Sherman used it.
No, it isn't how Sherman used it. But Sherman, all right, was the preeminent military in the field. The South didn't have the forces to stop him. Different situation. All right, he was in a situation of supremacy as far as arms go. The South isn't. The Army of Northern Virginia is not in a place of supremacy when it comes to combat arms and the forces in the field.
The Army of Northern Virginia, though, is in a place of almost equity with the Army of the Potomac, not in numbers, but in victories. They far surpassed them.
We're not talking about victories. We're not talking about leadership. What we're talking about is arms, the force of arms. The force of arms for the North is far superior to what the South is. If you don't husband your resources, if they had even attempted to go across several more of those rivers, like if they had taken Harrisburg and continued east, it would have been over. The Army of Northern Virginia would have been completely destroyed. They would have been trapped in the North, and that would have been the end of it.
What about okay, but what about things like Russia, World War II, or even World War I?
Right,
they had superior forces, they had superior numbers, a superior force of arms, but they still damn near lost to the Germans both times.
All right. Well, first of all, what did they do during World War I? All right. Yeah, they had more. They didn't have superior arms than the Germans did.
Right? They had numbers. They had numbers by far.
They did have numbers. All right. But they didn't have the weapons, they didn't have the artillery, and they didn't have the training. Okay, and what's more is they did not have the internal infrastructure to move troops around. In World War II, where they did use scorched earth tactics, they used the scorched earth tactics in the defense. As they were retreating, they were burning behind them. All right, in a broad swath to prevent the Germans from using those resources, from gaining those resources. It was a denial of resources that was trying to be applied. In this case here, all right, the farms that you're going to burn and everything else, all right, would it materially affect the ability of the logistics of the Union? The answer is no.
If you burn the City of Independence to the ground, that will show the Union a little bit of a black eye, would it not?
Whether it's a black, well, it'll anger a lot of the Union forces. In fact, it'll create even more hatred toward the South than was exhibited until the shooting of Lincoln.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Okay, I'm looking at the chat here. Falcon says, I'm a World War I and II buff, especially in the air. And then he followed that up with, in both wars, Russia only had numbers to help them and us. Okay, fair point on both of those. And man, we talk World War II fucking almost on a regular on the red eye. Like somehow we always end up in World War II. Oh yeah, it's all the British friends we have on MC.
Well, we don't talk about the battles generally. We tend to avoid most of the battles. We tend to talk about it in a generic sense rather than a specific battle.
Yeah, a political sense, not what we're doing here. Absolutely. Okay, so Lee doesn't burn his way through. And matter of fact, he actually issues orders to not pillage more than necessary. I know that's a weird way to put it, but yeah. No.
What did they do? They pillaged. I mean, let's be perfectly frank. They were pillaging. They were basically grabbing anything that they could eat. All right, anything that they could take, they would grab, and then they would say, "Here's this stack of worthless freaking Confederate money. Enjoy."
Oh, I know, in Pennsylvania too. Like, here's the Confederate dollars. That'll help.
So, I'm not blaming Lee. I don't freaking hate Lee for doing that because that's just the way war was back then. I mean, it is what it is.
Well, but my point is, though, pillage more than necessary. They're not running in there and stealing your gold and silver and your fucking paintings off the wall.
Oh, yes, they were. Oh, yes, they were. They weren't headed toward Gettysburg because they weren't going to steal the shoes. Okay? The idea that the Southerners were somehow, we're just kindly and gentler and we're so upstanding and we're like the aristocrats that we're morally superior. No, the average Union troop and the average Southern troop were the same, and they acted the same. And they did the same things. One of the biggest problems the South has as the war starts to go from this point on is their deserters are start to leave in droves, and they're basically roaming bands of thugs, raiding and pillaging even in the South and their own people at that point. They were almost as hated as the frickin' quote-unquote bluebellies.
Yeah, well, there's also the up in New York, the Copperheads that were mighty hated, and they were Confederate sympathizers. So we will get to the Copperheads.
There were Copperheads in New York, but the vast majority of them actually were in Ohio, in the Ohio Valley area, where they were captured and tossed across the river.
Yeah, no, and we will talk about the Copperheads. I think that's its own episode, to be quite honest. We have hit an hour. We can keep going, but it's up to you, sir.
Unfortunately, I think this is a good place to send it. This is the setup for the first day, and we'll get to the first day. And unfortunately, I gotta do something here, so I have to leave. Unfortunately.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. As always, are you good for next week, or what's going on? That's almost New Year's, right?
Next week is fine. Yeah, it won't quite be New Year's, but next week's fine.
All right, awesome. Thank you everybody for watching and who will watch. Please like, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, links are in the description for Streamlabs and Patreon. I know Patreon. When Subscribe Star gets up and running and doing their thing and actually being able to pay out, I will be moving off of Patreon. But thank you everybody. Good night. Good luck. And Merry fucking Christmas, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow, but I am not streaming on Christmas. The wife will murder me. And we can't have that. Later.